The story of Sweyn Forkbeard's conquest of England is one of brutal ambition, vengeance, and the dramatic clash of cultures. It begins not in England, but in the cold, competitive heart of Denmark. Sweyn Forkbeard, a man forged in the Viking tradition of strength and dominance, cites the Danish throne from his own father, Harald Bluetooth. This act in 986 established him as a formidable and ruthless leader, unafraid to claim power through force. Across the North Sea, England, under the rule of King Ethelred, was a wealthy but increasingly vulnerable kingdom. Ethelred, later known as the Unready or Ill-Advised, struggled to mount an effective defense against persistent Viking raids. The English strategy often devolved into paying Danegeld, a tribute to persuade the raiders to leave. This policy, however, only demonstrated England's wealth and weakness, making it a more tempting target. Sweyn Forkbeard saw this vulnerability as a grand opportunity for plunder and influence. In 994, he joined forces with Olaf Tryggvason, another ambitious Viking chieftain, to launch a major assault on London. The city's defenders, however, managed to repel the attack, showing unexpected resilience. Though London held, Sweyn's forces ravaged the surrounding countryside, spreading fear and destruction. Once again, Ethelred resorted to payment, and a massive Danegeld was paid to make the Vikings depart. For Sweyn, these early campaigns were immensely profitable, but they were merely a prelude to his ultimate ambition. The turning point, the act that transformed raids for profit into a war for conquest, came in the year 1002. On November 13th, a day dedicated to Saint Brice, King Ethelred made a fateful and brutal decision. He ordered the execution of all Danish men, women, and children living in England. This event, known as the Saint Brice's Day Massacre, was an act of panicked ethnic cleansing. Ethelred feared the Danish settlers, believing they would treacherously deprive him and all his counselors of life. Among the victims was believed to be Gunhild, Sweyn Forkbeard's own sister, who was living in England with her husband. News of the massacre and the murder of his sister reached Sweyn in Denmark. His profitable raiding enterprise was instantly transformed into a burning quest for personal vengeance. The conquest of England was no longer just about wealth. It was now a matter of blood and honor. In 1003, Sweyn's retaliatory invasion began, marked by a new level of ferocity. He landed in the southwest and immediately laid siege to the city of Exeter. The city's defenses were betrayed, and Sweyn's army sacked it, taking immense plunder and leaving it in ruins. From Exeter, his army marched through Wiltshire, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. The local English fyrd, or militia, attempted to mount a defense but was often disorganized and ineffective. Sweyn's campaign continued into East Anglia, a region with a significant Danish heritage. He sacked the city of Norwich and Thetford before a strange event halted his campaign. A great famine swept across England in 1005, making it impossible for his army to forage and sustain itself. With his supply lines stretched and the land unable to provide, Sweyn was forced to sail back to Denmark. The respite for England was temporary, as the threat of the Vikings had not disappeared. Even without Sweyn, other Viking armies continued to plague England, most notably one led by Thorkel the Tall from 1019. Thorkel's campaign was long and devastating, further draining England's resources and morale. They captured the Archbishop of Canterbury, Elfheah, and held him for a huge ransom. When Elfheah refused to be ransomed, the drunken Vikings brutally murdered him with bones and cattle skulls. This act horrified even Thorkel the Tall, who subsequently switched his allegiance to King Ethelred. The internal chaos and weakened state of England set the perfect stage for Sweyn's final, decisive invasion. In the summer of 113, Sweyn Forkbeard returned, but this time he came not just to raid, but to conquer. He led a massive, well-organized fleet and army, landing at Sandwich on the coast of Kent. From Sandwich, he quickly demonstrated his strategic intent was different this time. He sailed up the eastern coast, bypassing the south, where Ethelred and Thorkel's forces were concentrated. He entered the Humber estuary and sailed up the River Trent to Gainsborough. Here, in the heart of the old Danello, he found a receptive audience. Uhtred of Northumbria and all the people of the region quickly submitted to him, providing hostages and supplies. With the entire north of England under his control, Sweyn had secured a powerful base of operations. He entrusted the northern army to his son, Cynod, and prepared to march south. Sweyn's army swept southwards, crossing the ancient Roman road of Watling Street. He demanded submission from the towns in his path, and any that resisted were met with overwhelming force. Oxford and Winchester, ancient centers of English learning and power, quickly capitulated to avoid destruction. Only London, the site of his earlier failure, remained defiant. King Ethelred and Sweyn's former ally, Thorkel the Tall, were inside the city, leading its defense. Sweyn launched a fierce assault on the city, but the defenders fought with desperate courage. The attack was repulsed, and Sweyn suffered significant losses, a bitter echo of his defeat in 994. Rather than get bogged down in a protracted siege, Sweyn once again showed his strategic cunning. He withdrew his army and marched to the west, consolidating his control over the rest of southern England. Received the submission of the Western Thegns at Bath, effectively isolating London. The men of London, saying that all of England had now yielded, lost their will to fight. They feared Sweyn's vengeance if they continued to resist alone. Finally, London surrendered and provided hostages to the Viking King. King Ethelred's position had become completely untenable. With his kingdom lost, he sent his wife Emma and their sons to her brother's court in Normandy. Shortly after, Ethelred himself fled England, taking refuge on the Isle of Wight before following his family to Normandy. The Anglo-Saxon reign, which had lasted for centuries, was over. On Christmas Day of 1013, Sweyn Forkbeard was proclaimed king of all England. His vengeance for the St. Brice's Day massacre was complete. He had taken the entire kingdom. His reign, however, was to be astonishingly brief. After decades of fighting and a lifetime of ambition, he had finally achieved his ultimate prize. He began the process of organizing his new kingdom, levying a heavy tax to pay his massive army. But just 5 weeks after being declared king, on February 3rd, 1014, Sweyn Forkbeard suddenly died at Gainsborough. The cause of his death is unknown. Some chronicles suggest a fall from his horse, others a sudden illness, or even a supernatural strike. His Viking army in England immediately proclaimed his son, Cynod, as their king. The English lords, however, saw an opportunity and sent a delegation to Normandy. They invited Ethelred to return, on the condition that he promised to rule more justly than before. Ethelred agreed, returned to England, and quickly marched against Cynod's forces. Cynod, unprepared for this rapid turn of events, was forced to withdraw and sail back to Denmark. Though Sweyn's reign was fleeting, his conquest had irrevocably shattered the Anglo-Saxon state. He had proven that England could be conquered, paving the way for his son's future success. Sweyn Forkbeard's triumph, though short-lived, was absolute, marking him as the first Viking to be crowned king of all England. The initial Danish presence in England was one of trade and settlement, not just raiding. Many Danes had integrated into English society, particularly in the northern region known as the Danelaw. Ethelred's paranoia was fueled by his counselors, who saw the assimilated Danes as a fifth column. The order for the massacre was delivered by secret messengers to royal reeves across the kingdom. In Oxford, the Danes sought sanctuary in St. Fridswide's church, but the townspeople set it ablaze. The news of such atrocities spread slowly but surely back to the Scandinavian world. Sweyn's response was not immediate, as he spent months gathering a fleet and army worthy of his rage. His 10-3 campaign focused on demonstrating the price of treachery, prioritizing destruction over plunder. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes his army, harrying and burning and slaying wherever they went. The famine of 1005 was a severe blow, seen by the English as a form of divine intervention. During the interim, Ethelred attempted to strengthen his kingdom by building a new royal fleet. However, internal disputes and treachery led to the fleet's effectiveness being crippled before it was even used. Thorkel arrival in 1019 was independent of Sweyn, a Viking seeking his own fortune. His 3-year campaign was a masterclass in extortion, culminating in the largest Danegeld payment ever made. When Sweyn returned in 1010, he found in England already bled white by Thorkel's army. His strategy to secure the Danelaw first was brilliant, as it gave him allies, supplies, and a secure rear guard. The march south was less a battle and more a triumphal procession, as town after town submitted. The resistance in London was a matter of pride for its citizens and for Ethelred. Sweyn's decision to ignore London and complete the subjugation of the rest of the country was a psychological masterstroke. Ethelred's flight to Normandy was a humiliating end to a long and troubled reign. Sweyn's coronation on Christmas Day was a deeply symbolic act, usurping the most important date in the Christian calendar. His first and only act as king was to demand a massive tax to reward the men who had won him the kingdom. His sudden death threw the entire political situation into chaos once more. The English nobles' choice to recall Ethelred was a pragmatic one, preferring a flawed king of their own to a foreign conqueror. Cnut's retreat was orderly. Before leaving, he mutilated the hostages his father had taken, as a final warning. Sweyn's body was initially buried in England, then later repatriated to Denmark to be buried in a church he had built. His legacy was secured not by his own short reign, but by the vast and powerful North Sea Empire his son Cnut would build upon his foundation. The Conquest was a culmination of over a century of Viking pressure on England. Sweyn's personal charisma and military skill were key factors in his success. The lack of a unified English resistance was just as crucial to his victory. The technology of the Viking longship allowed for unparalleled strategic mobility. Sweyn's army was a professional fighting force, hardened by years of warfare. In contrast, the English Fyrd was a part-time militia, often poorly equipped and led. The Conquest had a profound impact on the English language, introducing many Norse words. It also led to a new Anglo-Scandinavian aristocracy that would rule England for a generation. Sweyn's story is a stark reminder of how personal vengeance can alter the course of history. His triumph was the high watermark of the Viking Age in England. The political instability in England was a constant invitation for foreign intervention. Sweyn's initial raids were probing attacks, designed to test defenses and measure response times. The payment of Danegeld created a cycle of extortion that was difficult to break. The St. Brice's Day massacre was a strategic blunder, turning a manageable problem into an existential threat. Sweyn's forces were adept at living off the land, a key advantage in enemy territory. The English nobility was plagued by rivalries and betrayals, which Sweyn expertly exploited. Cnut's role as his father's lieutenant in 1013 was his first major experience of command. The capture of hostages from noble families was a standard practice to ensure compliance. London's bridge was a formidable defensive obstacle, heavily fortified with towers and gates. The news of Ethelred's flight caused the final collapse of morale among the Londoners. Sweyn's brief rule was harsh, establishing a clear new order through fear and authority. Some English chroniclers, writing later, attributed his death to the spirit of the martyred saint, Edmund Forkbeard. The return of Ethelred was hailed as a liberation, though it would prove to be short-lived. Conflict did not end with Sweyn's death, but entered a new phase. The war between Cnut and Ethelred's son, Edmund Ironseed. Sweyn Forkbeard's conquest was a pivotal moment that ultimately led to the creation of a unified Anglo-Scandinavian England under Cnut.